The laughter around the dinner table felt like knives. Mina sat frozen, her parents' words echoing louder than the clinking glasses. "You'll never be half the woman your sister Lyra is," her mother announced proudly, pulling Lyra closer as if Mina were a stranger. The relatives chuckled uncomfortably, some shaking their heads at Mina like she was a failure. Mina lowered her eyes, but inside, a storm brewed. She wasn't angry at being compared. She was angry because they had no idea about the secret she'd been hiding. A secret worth $84,000 that would turn their smug laughter into stunned silence. The dining room was filled with laughter, the smell of roasted chicken, and the sound of glasses clinking together. Everyone was enjoying the big family dinner. Everyone except Mina. She sat quietly at the corner of the table, pushing food around her plate while her parents went on and on about her sister, Lyra. "Just look at Lyra," her mother said proudly, placing a hand on her favorite daughter's shoulder. "She has the best job in the city. She dresses so well. And she's beautiful. We are so lucky to have her." Her father nodded, smiling at Lyra like she was a queen. "Yes, she is the pride of this family. Any parent would be blessed to have a daughter like her." The relatives clapped and nodded. Some even gave Lyra compliments, saying how smart and successful she looked. Lyra, of course, smiled sweetly, soaking in all the praise like sunshine. But then, the words that followed pierced Mina's heart like a knife. "And then there is Mina," her mother added with a small laugh. "Always so quiet, always so behind. She's nothing like her sister." A few relatives chuckled awkwardly. One of them whispered, "Poor girl," while another shook his head as if Mina was a shame to the family. Mina froze, her fork trembling in her hand. She could feel her cheeks burning, but she forced a faint smile. She didn't want them to see her pain. Her father leaned back in his chair and sighed loudly. "Sometimes I wonder if Mina will ever be anything at all. We spend so much energy on her, but she doesn't give us reasons to be proud. She's just there." The words hit Mina harder than any slap. Years of silence, of being overlooked, all crashed down on her shoulders at that moment. She wanted to scream, she wanted to run, but instead she sat still, pretending the insult didn't break her. Across the table, Lyra smirked, her eyes sparkling with pride at being the star of the family. She leaned toward Mina and whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "You'll never catch up to me." Mina swallowed hard, her heart pounding. Everyone at the table laughed and clapped for Lyra again, while Mina sat there, silent, wounded, but with something burning deep inside her chest. A storm was coming, and no one at that table knew it. Mina kept a faint smile on her face, though inside she felt like she was breaking into pieces. She did not want to give her parents or her sister the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She had learned long ago that her tears meant nothing to them. If she showed pain, they would only use it to laugh at her more. So she lifted her chin slightly, forced her lips to curl upward, and pretended she was unaffected. But inside, her chest burned. It was not just about the words spoken at the table that night. It was about all the years behind those words. The endless comparisons, the sharp remarks, the little jokes that made her feel small. Every time Lyra was praised, Mina was reminded that she was never good enough. Every time her parents looked at her with disappointment, another cut was added to the wounds she carried silently. She remembered the times she had come home excited to share something, like passing an exam, finishing a project, or getting a small recognition at school. Her parents barely looked up. "That's good," they would say quickly, before turning to ask Lyra about her day. But when Lyra achieved even the smallest thing, they would celebrate as if she had moved mountains. That was the story of Mina's life. At the table now, she felt all of those old memories piling on top of her heart. She wanted to scream that she was not invisible, that she was worth more than they thought. But she knew if she spoke, her voice would crack, and they would see her weakness. So she stayed silent. Her silence was her shield, even if it hurt. She looked around the room. Her uncles and aunts were smiling at Lyra. Her parents were glowing with pride. Not one person noticed the pain in Mina's eyes. She was there, sitting with them. Yet she felt like she did not belong at that table, as if she were only a shadow beside her sister's bright light. Her smile stayed on her face, but it was heavy, almost painful. She was holding back the storm inside her chest. Nobody knew how hard it was to keep sitting there, pretending, while her heart was screaming. She had carried this weight for years, and tonight was just another night to add to her silent wounds. But deep inside, hidden beneath that quiet smile, a small fire was alive. A fire waiting for its moment to rise. When everyone thought Mina was wasting her life, she was actually fighting battles they knew nothing about. By day, she worked at a small shop, arranging goods, serving customers, and earning just enough to pay for her transport. In the evenings, she helped a neighbor's children with homework for a little extra cash. And when the house went quiet at night, while everyone else was sleeping, Mina would sit in front of her old second-hand laptop, typing until her eyes grew heavy. She had discovered online work by accident. One day, while scrolling on her cracked phone, she saw a post about people earning money by writing and selling handmade items. Curiosity pulled her in. She started small, selling simple designs and writing short pieces for clients abroad. The pay was little in the beginning, sometimes not even enough for her bus fare. But Mina never gave up. She stayed awake, night after night, learning, practicing, and slowly improving her skills. Her parents never asked where she went every morning, or why she came home so late. They assumed she was wasting time, and sometimes they scolded her for being aimless. Lyra laughed at her, saying, "Maybe one day you'll finally get a real job." Mina swallowed the insults, never defending herself, because she knew words meant nothing without proof. There were nights she cried quietly, staring at the screen when payments were delayed or orders got cancelled. Sometimes she wanted to quit, but she reminded herself that nobody was going to save her. If she wanted a future, she had to build it with her own hands. Slowly, her efforts began to bear fruit. A client referred her to another, and then another. Orders increased and her earnings grew. She saved every single dollar she could, refusing to spend on luxuries. While Lyra bought new clothes and flaunted them, Mina was content with her old dresses, because she had a bigger plan. What her family didn't know was that beneath her quiet face was a young woman carrying the weight of endless jobs and sleepless nights. Every coin she earned was hidden away, every sacrifice carefully made. They saw her as lazy, but in reality, she was building something powerful in silence. Mina's struggles were not empty. They were the foundation of a secret that would one day shock them all. Lyra leaned back in her chair, her eyes sparkling with mischief as everyone's laughter still echoed from the praises thrown her way. She turned her attention to Mina, who sat quietly with that faint smile still fixed on her lips. "You know," Lyra began, her voice loud enough for the whole table to hear, "at least I have a real job. Mina's career is so invisible, sometimes I wonder if it even exists." The table erupted in small giggles. Some of the relatives tried to hide their laughter, but the smirks on their faces betrayed them. Mina sat frozen, her spoon resting against her plate. She wanted to reply, but before she could even gather the courage, Lyra continued. "Honestly, Mama, Papa," she said, pretending to sound concerned, "what will happen to Mina in the future? Will she ever move out? Or will she just keep living here, waiting for you both to take care of her forever?" Her words dripped with mockery, each one striking Mina harder than the last. The parents exchanged knowing looks. Her mother chuckled and shook her head. "Don't say that, Lyra. You know your sister will find her way one day." But even her tone carried no belief, no real defense. It was more like pity, and pity hurt Mina almost as much as Lyra's sharp tongue. Lyra smirked, leaning closer to Mina as though she were sharing a private joke, but loud enough for others to catch. "Maybe you can be my assistant one day," she teased. "I could give you some small jobs. At least then, you'll be useful." A few cousins laughed at that, nudging each other, whispering behind their hands. Mina clenched her hands under the table, her nails digging into her palms. On the outside, she forced that same faint smile, refusing to give Lyra the satisfaction of seeing her break. But inside, her chest tightened, her breath felt heavy, and her pride stung like fire. Lyra leaned back proudly, clearly enjoying the attention, while Mina sat in silence, carrying the weight of every word like a stone pressing against her heart. They all saw her as weak, as the forgotten daughter who had no direction. Nobody in that room knew the truth, that while they laughed at her invisible career, Mina had been building something far greater than they could imagine. Her silence that night was not weakness. It was a shield, protecting a secret that would one day silence all of Lyra's mockery in the most unexpected way. Mina sat still as the laughter circled around the table, every word from Lyra cutting deeper into her heart. For years, she had learned to swallow her pain, to bury her anger, and to carry her wounds in silence. But this night felt different. Something inside her was no longer willing to stay quiet. She could feel the heat rising within her, not as wild rage, but as a calm fire that gave her strength. She slowly reached for the glass of water in front of her. Her hand did not tremble, her face did not break. She lifted the glass, took a slow sip, and placed it back on the table with quiet grace. The laughter was still lingering, but a hush began to fall when they noticed her movements. Mina stood up, her chair sliding back gently against the floor. All eyes turned toward her, some with curiosity, others with mockery, expecting her to storm out in tears or defend herself in anger. But Mina did neither. Her face was calm, her lips pressed into a straight line, her eyes steady and unblinking. For the first time, she wasn't hiding behind a faint smile. She was holding herself with strength. Her voice broke the silence, not loud, but firm enough to command attention. "I have something to share," she said simply. The relatives glanced at each other, surprised. Her parents looked uneasy, unsure if their quiet daughter was about to embarrass them. Lyra smirked, folding her arms, certain that Mina would only make a fool of herself. But Mina's tone carried no weakness. It was measured, clear, and unshaken. Years of being silenced had prepared her for this very moment. The girl they had always dismissed was standing before them, not as the timid daughter they thought they knew, but as someone who had been quietly gathering strength in the shadows. The room fell completely still. Forks rested on plates, glasses were lowered, and even the whispers died. Everyone was waiting for what Mina would say next. Lyra leaned back in her chair, pretending to be relaxed, but her smirk twitched slightly. For the first time, she felt something unfamiliar, a small shiver of doubt. Mina looked at each of them, her gaze sharp yet calm. This was the boiling point, the moment where years of pain would no longer stay buried. She was ready to speak her truth, and no one in that room would ever see her the same way again. All eyes stayed on Mina as she stood tall at the dinner table. The room was silent, waiting for her next words. For a moment, she simply reached into her small handbag, the same old bag everyone had mocked her for carrying, and carefully pulled out a neatly folded envelope. She placed it on the table in front of her, her hands steady, her eyes locked on the very people who had doubted her all her life. "I've been quiet for too long," Mina began, her voice clear but calm. "You've all laughed at me, compared me, and called me useless, but none of you ever asked me what I've been doing with my life." She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of official papers. The pages were full of payment receipts, bank statements, and client invoices. She spread them out across the table, one by one, letting the numbers speak louder than any argument. "This," Mina said, tapping the papers gently, "is my work. This is my life that you never cared to ask about. For the last 3 years, I have been running an online business. I stayed up while you all slept. I worked when everyone thought I was wasting time. And today my savings stand at $84,000. The words struck the room like lightning. Gasps escaped from a few relatives. Her mother's hand froze midair. Her father's jaw tightened, and Lyra's confident smirk disappeared in an instant. Nobody moved. Nobody laughed. They only stared at the bold numbers on the papers. Numbers that proved Mina was not the failure they had always painted her to be. "You said I had no career," Mina continued, her eyes scanning their shocked faces. "You said I'd live off my parents forever. But I built this empire in silence. I did it without your support, without your encouragement, and without your belief in me. I did it because I refused to remain small, even when you wanted me to be." Her voice never wavered. Every word carried the weight of her struggles, and the pride of her success. The table that once mocked her now sat frozen, unable to meet her gaze. Mina's revelation had flipped the entire story, and for the first time, the family saw her not as the weak daughter, but as the strongest one among them. The room froze as Mina's words settled in the air. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Her papers lay spread out on the table, filled with proof of her earnings, the numbers staring back at everyone. Her parents' jaws dropped as if they had forgotten how to close them. Her mother blinked rapidly, trying to understand what she was seeing, while her father leaned forward, scanning the receipts as though reading them would change the truth. Relatives who had laughed just moments ago now gasped in disbelief. The same mouths that mocked Mina were suddenly silent, their eyes wide with shock. A cousin who once teased her for doing nothing with her life whispered, 84,000? As if repeating the figure would help him believe it. The pride that filled the room earlier for Lyra now shifted sharply, leaving her in the shadows. Lyra's smirk vanished completely. She stared at the papers with disbelief, her fingers tightening around her glass. For the first time, she had no clever words, no mocking jokes. Mina's truth had stripped her of the power she always held over her sister. She glanced around the table, seeing that all the admiration was no longer on her. It had moved to Mina, the sister she had called worthless. Mina stood calm, her eyes steady, her silence commanding more respect than any loud declaration ever could. And then it began, the questions. "Mina, how did you do this?" one aunt asked, leaning forward with excitement. Another uncle said, "What kind of business is this? Teach us, Mina, teach our children." Even her mother, who had once called her useless, stammered, "Why didn't you tell us? We had no idea you were working so hard." The same people who had dismissed her were now begging for details, desperate to understand how she had achieved what none of them expected. Their voices carried both amazement and guilt. Mina let their words wash over her, but she did not rush to answer. She wanted them to feel the weight of their disbelief, the sting of their own judgments. At that table, the power had shifted. No longer was Mina the shadow. No longer was she the forgotten daughter. She was the one everyone wanted to hear, the one whose silence had turned into the loudest truth, and nothing could erase the shock on their faces now. Mina looked around the table, her papers still lying before everyone like undeniable proof of her strength. The shock in their faces gave her courage, but she knew this moment was not only about showing numbers. It was about speaking the words she had buried in her chest for years. She straightened her back and let her eyes meet each of theirs. "You never saw my worth," she said firmly, her voice calm but sharp. "Not because I had none, but because you were too busy comparing me to Lyra." The room went silent again. Her parents froze, guilt washing over their expressions. Relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Lyra's eyes narrowed, but she stayed quiet, unable to interrupt. Mina continued, her voice growing stronger. "All my life, I worked hard, but you ignored me. When I tried to share my small victories, you brushed me aside like they didn't matter. But when Lyra did something as little as buying a new dress, you celebrated her like she had conquered the world. Do you know how that feels? To give your best and still be treated like nothing." Her mother looked down, her lips trembling. Her father rubbed his forehead, avoiding her eyes. Cousins who once laughed at her sat silently, their shame written across their faces. Mina's words carried the weight of years. "You thought silence meant weakness, but silence was my no we're right now with her nights in the Bahari Zuri year. All my cigarettes any angular wats naidu Zuri ram this now was Nizak and there's mess. No isn't all base the sarkar upster with her little was no one known of it. Ave your vanish. Honey Galib's no her sister has derps over the lavering a year than. And a share and bad up. Here come on direct selves. Him gagwini. Nearly if we get up. No, I am among it must earth snarshniva. That was did. He'll fast the sea honey. Stabs her knowing ish the wolf kneel. Her head file snowed out. All best the veneer off than a zaka. Snellas nene visary near it going if and merfeller flood no nomas. All for I no massasit. Other was the water have oracle was even. Stay out when you sing all one. Say I out the winning italit. Or Gusnina gives a wing it must. Snow working a yidil sheps. Swestel I remember. Her did I do so it was a safe and not as signs your lotion immer for eva hang us no what mesh. Slang it must is knitted fishy little smur in this nilas. Ah, loose draw for thrown get I had through the video with love more and it are here. Right, let's see shine. All band not now. And it will in it as a and the her all on zone apes any master for the. Yeah, what will the her wife boju year his alley. Ah, der snel curry. Makes der one up. Keeps it now with us it will snare. Squashed in the nose that it's mouth of admission. Say, there will swistle armas. More with lifts and let's see the face is sweet for such the so the wire. Oh, man. Now we need it so on me. Harry will fat on me. Never finger shirt up. And if I silver. Him now for the vents in the Surrey Macri every now merist. Ah, river bestand. Right nights. Yeah, this net. With Nazir one invading on the Vegan arch states. Hershby family lives where her lives in empathy. Voice, like, talk like, and act like. She was the perfect daughter, the shining face of the family. But now that image had cracked. Her smirk had disappeared, replaced by the shadow of envy. The respect that once followed her so easily was now slipping through her fingers. Mina, on the other hand, stood taller than ever. Her success was not just about money. It was about strength, resilience, and dignity. She had shown them that true pride did not come from being praised endlessly, but from fighting in silence and rising above doubt. Her parents remained quiet, their shame too heavy to hide. But the younger generation at the table saw something different. They saw hope. They saw that even if their own families compared them, ignored them, or underestimated them, they could still rise. Mina had become proof. The power of the room had changed forever. No longer was Lyra the role model. Mina had set a new standard, one that could not be taken away. And though her doubters felt humiliated, her cousins felt inspired. They would carry her story with them, not as gossip, but as a reminder that being underestimated could be the strongest beginning of all. Mina let her eyes travel slowly around the table. Every face was turned toward her, some filled with guilt, some with disbelief, and some with a new kind of respect. For years, she had sat in that same room, feeling like she did not belong, shrinking into silence while everyone praised Lyra. But tonight, the silence was hers, and it carried power. She took a deep breath, her shoulders straight, her voice calm but strong. "I was never half of anyone," she said, her words slicing through the heavy air. "I was always whole. And now, I own the life you thought I couldn't build." The room stayed completely frozen. Her mother's lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. Her father's gaze dropped to the table, unable to meet her eyes. The cousins who once laughed at her sat still, remembering every joke they had made at her expense. And Lyra, once so confident, once the shining star, could only stare, her pride shattered, her smirk gone forever. Mina did not shout. She did not cry. She simply stood there, her presence louder than anything she had ever spoken before. For the first time, the family saw her not as the quiet, overlooked daughter, but as the woman who had risen without their help, the woman who carried strength they had failed to recognize. No one dared to argue. No one dared to dismiss her. The silence that filled the room was heavy with realization. Mina had spoken her truth, and nothing could erase it. She gathered her papers calmly, sliding them back into her bag, her movements slow and certain. With each fold, it was as if she was sealing the final chapter of their doubts. When she looked up again, her face held no bitterness, only dignity. Her words lingered in the air long after she stopped speaking, echoing in their minds, impossible to forget. Mina had reclaimed her place, not by begging for their love, but by standing firm in her worth. At that table, the story had changed forever. Mina was no longer the forgotten one. She was the proof that quiet strength could roar the loudest. And as she stood there, she knew she had not only won back her dignity, she had written her own ending.